I laid the fork on the left, the knife on the right, and smoothed the napkin into a soft crease. My hands moved on their own, muscle memory from decades of setting this table. The plate was my good one, even though I was the only one eating. I spooned out the cranberry sauce, just a small helping. It wobbled slightly on the porcelain, and for 1 second I imagined the door opening, coats damp from the cold, laughter bouncing in behind them. But it stayed quiet. Only the hum of the fridge filled the space. I adjusted the little vase in the center, 3 paper white flowers in water I'd changed yesterday. Everything was as it should be, except nothing really was. I stood back and looked at the table. It was beautiful in its lonely way. I wasn't setting it for celebration. I was setting it for memory. A kind of stubborn hope I didn't ask for, but still held on to. I reached for the phone without looking, just in case. There was no buzz, but I thought maybe I missed it. I hadn't. Still, nothing. I stared at the screen, waiting like it might blink or hum or do something kind. Then I put it back down on the table, next to the untouched tea. The steam had thinned. Now, the cup lukewarm at best. Outside, the wind brushed past the window like someone tiptoeing by, not wanting to interrupt, not meaning to stay. The light had gone soft and long, painting shadows into the corners of the kitchen. There's a kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It settles like a coat on your shoulders, heavy, shapeless. That's what I sat in. Not anger, not heartbreak, just the absence that wraps around you when no one remembers to come home. The chair was still turned toward the door, Harold's chair. It always faced that way, angled slightly, like he was waiting for someone to arrive. I never changed it, still haven't. When I passed it, the wood creaked slightly under its own weight. I paused, just for a moment, my hand brushing the backrest like I used to when I'd pass behind him. I've sat in many chairs since he left, but that one still feels occupied. It holds more presence than half the people who forget to call. It waits, like I do. The sauce had just started to bubble when I leaned over the pot and stirred gently. The smell of cloves and orange rose into the air, wrapping around my face like old perfume. I didn't need to taste it. I knew it by heart. They used to fight over it years ago. Grandma's cranberry sauce, they'd say, piling it onto turkey and toast alike. I made it again this year, even though there was no one to serve it to. Maybe I was just preserving a tradition. Or maybe, without meaning to, I was trying to preserve myself. I watched the red syrup swirl, the wooden spoon heavy in my hand. It felt like speaking a language only I still understood, one I wasn't, ready to forget, even if everyone else already had. I lowered myself slowly into the chair, hands trembling just enough that I had to steady them against the edge of the table. Not from the cold, not even from pain, just something deeper, heavier. I looked down at the plate I'd prepared, everything in its place, just like always. But it wasn't tradition I tasted, it was memory. And loneliness, when it finally settles in your bones, makes your body ache in places no medicine can reach. The wind rattled the window pane softly, a reminder that the world still moved on outside, whether I had company or not. I gripped the table edge a little tighter, grounding myself like a woman bracing against a wave that never came. The fork felt too heavy for what little food I took. I cut a small piece of turkey and placed it in my mouth, not because I was hungry, but because it was there. And food shouldn't sit untouched, neither should people. As I chewed, the silence gave way to echoes. Diane's laugh from the far end of the table, my grandson arguing about who got the wishbone, Harold humming as he carved. None of it was real now. But it played, like a favorite record in another room. The porch light flickered outside, casting a dim glow against the frosted window. I swallowed slowly. The food didn't comfort me, but it gave me something to do with my hands while the ghosts kept me company. The house used to thrum like a living thing. Laughter spilled down the hallway, bounced off the walls, and wrapped around corners like sunlight sneaking through curtains. Diane would dash past me with a paper crown on her head, giggling while the twins chased each other with wooden spoons. "Don't run with those," I'd call out, laughing even as I said it. The sound of joy had its own rhythm, like boiling cider bubbling on the stove, or the creak of the old floorboards when someone skipped instead of walking. Even the dog used to bark like he didn't want to miss the fun. Back then, every room felt full. Not with things, but with people who wanted to be close. I didn't just hear that joy, I felt it. It wrapped around me, gentle as a shawl on cool shoulders, reminding me I was needed, loved, anchored, and now, I remember it the way we remember spring in the heart of winter. Not gone, just quieter. Harold always carved the turkey. It was tradition, his job, and no one dared touch it. He'd tie the apron clumsily around his waist, and there was always a splash of gravy or a smudge of flour somewhere on his sleeve. He hummed while he worked. Nothing specific, just that deep, steady sound he made when his hands were busy. It was as familiar as the ticking clock or the scent of rolls in the oven. From the kitchen doorway, I'd watch him slice through the golden skin, his hands sure, his rhythm unhurried. It wasn't just food he was serving. It was steady presence. A kind of quiet strength that fed more than our bellies. I remember how full I used to feel before I ever sat down. Just seeing him there, carving, humming, anchoring the room like a beam across the ceiling. He never said much during it. Didn't need to. His love was in every clean cut, every portion he served, and I carried that fullness with me, long after. The plates were cleared. Those boots used to drive me crazy, muddy, loud, always left by the door like a trail of mess I had to follow. "Wipe your feet," I'd shout, even though I knew he wouldn't. He'd laugh, dropping his backpack, his sneakers, and a trail of damp footprints straight into my hallway. But those marks, they meant something. They said he was home, that his day had ended and mine was beginning again. They weren't messes, not really. They were declarations. I was here, Grandma. I used to scrub those prints with an old rag, knees cracking, muttering to myself. But deep down, I cherished every smudge. I'd clean them up slowly, like smoothing out the edges of love. The hallway is spotless now. The mat barely shifts. And somehow, it's the quiet that stains more than the dirt ever did. My apron still hangs by the stove, though it doesn't get much use these days. It's faded, stained in places, and there's a tiny burn near the pocket where I once brushed too close to the oven. But when I used to tie it around my waist, it was like putting on armor, soft, buttery armor that smelled of sage and yeast. That apron wasn't just fabric. It was memory, history, duty. It meant I was the one who remembered how they liked their potatoes, who always knew when the pie needed 5 more minutes. The minute it was on, the questions would start. "Is this done, Mom? Did you put extra cinnamon? What's the secret again?" I'd smile and say, "Butter, always butter," and they believed me. Because when I wore that apron, I wasn't just cooking. I was holding the family together, one warm meal at a time. There was a time they came to me for everything. Recipes, sure, but also advice, a story to calm nerves, a hug that didn't need explaining. If someone was crying, they ended up on my couch. If someone had good news, it was my phone that rang first. I was the center of their orbit, and they revolved around my warmth without even thinking. It felt natural, like the sun rising, like breathing. I didn't notice the shift at first. The slow way their calls got shorter, how they started texting instead of stopping by, how their problems went somewhere else before they reached me. It wasn't with malice, I know that, just time doing what time does. But still, I miss the gravity. The pull, being the place they turned toward without question. It started so small. One Thanksgiving, they brought store-bought pie. I didn't have time, she said, brushing it off. I smiled, said it was fine. The next year they told me to just relax this year. They wanted to host. I understood. Or at least I told myself I did. Then came the year they didn't ask for my mashed potatoes. Didn't ask for anything, just told me what time to show up, and I did. Of course I did. Sat there with my hands folded while someone else passed around green beans from a can. No one noticed the silence where my voice used to be. The invites started coming later and later. Sometimes not at all. I can't remember the last time someone needed something only I could give. And that's the part that aches. The not knowing when it ends. The quiet realization that you were the center of something, and then you weren't. I was just scrolling, like I always do before supper. Checking old photos, rereading a few messages, making sure I hadn't missed anything. The fire crackled, low behind me, and the stew simmered on the stove, its scent warm and familiar. Then I saw her name. A voice note. I tapped play without thinking. Her voice, my granddaughter's, breezy and bright, like dried leaves skipping across the pavement. So I told Mom, she said, laughing, it's just easier without Grandma there. I froze. She kept talking, her tone light, as if she were discussing the weather. I didn't catch the rest at first. My ears were ringing. I sat still, the glow from the fireplace dancing across the iPad screen. My thumb hovered over pause, but I didn't press it. I let it play out, all the way to the end. It was short, maybe 15 seconds. But in that time, something inside me shifted. Not broke exactly, just loosened, like a thread being pulled gently from the edge of an old quilt. Her giggle used to be the music that played in my dreams. This time, it sounded tinny, distant. She always makes it about her, she said, still laughing. And then the voice faded into a silence that hurt more than the words. I stared at the screen, waiting, hoping to hear someone correct her, maybe laugh awkwardly and say, "Don't be mean." But the only thing that followed was quiet agreement. My hands were still, the iPad warm against my lap. Wood cracked in the fireplace, trying to sound like comfort, but it didn't reach. That sentence didn't just sting, it echoed. It wrapped. Around the years I'd given, the holidays I'd hosted, the birthdays I remembered when no one else did. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. Just hollow. Like the center of something that used to feel whole. I tapped the message again. Once more. Just to be sure, maybe I misunderstood the tone. Maybe my ears had twisted it, or my heart had shaded it darker than it was. But the second time, the words came through clearer, sharper. Her voice didn't waver, and no one else said a thing. I paused the recording, my finger hovering again. I stared at the frozen playback bar as if it might shift, like maybe she'd take it back this time. She didn't. I felt silly. Like someone who shows up to a dinner that already ended, holding a warm pie no one asked for. I folded my hands in my lap, the same way I used to in church, back when we sat on wooden pews, and I still believed everything could be fixed with patience and prayer. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there, keeping my hands still to keep my heart from shaking too hard. I tried to focus on the warmth from the fire, but even that felt like it had dimmed. There's a kind of ache that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream or spill. It settles low in your chest and presses, quiet, heavy, familiar. Like a coat you didn't want to wear but forgot how to take off. I stared at the message for a long while. My thumb hovered again, but this time it didn't hesitate. I tapped delete. The screen blinked. The voice note vanished. I sat back slowly. The tablet felt lighter in my hands, but I didn't. Erasing it didn't undo it. It didn't rewind the clock or soften the words. It didn't bring back the little girl who once called me her favorite person in the world. Words like that, words spoken in carelessness, don't just go away. They tuck themselves into the folds of your memory, into the seams of your heart. Even if you can't play them again, they still echo. Afterward, I just sat there. I didn't check for other messages. I didn't move. I listened. But not to her voice anymore, to the space she left behind. Even the fire seemed quieter. Its gentle crackle, once a comfort, now felt like it didn't know what to say either. I stared into it, watching the last bits of ember curl into the air, soft and orange and dying slow. I used to think I was the center, the storyteller, the matriarch. But tonight, I wasn't even part of the conversation. They laughed somewhere else now. I wasn't even in the room. I stepped out onto the porch with the phone in my hand, not for any big reason. I didn't want to stir things up. I just wanted to ask what time to come by, like I had for years. The sunlight was slanting across the floorboards, warm but soft. I leaned back into the rocking chair and dialed. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, as light as I could. "Just wondering what time I should head over Thursday?" There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to feel it. We're keeping it kind of small this year," she said, like she was easing into something slippery. I nodded before I even knew what else she'd say. "Oh, all right, just thought I'd check." My voice felt smaller than usual, like even I wasn't sure I deserved to ask. I didn't expect to feel like an afterthought before breakfast, but I did. She said it kindly. They always do. Don't. They? Like carving away something good, but doing it with a butter knife instead of a blade. "We're just doing something smaller this year," she said. "Something smaller." As if love could be measured like table settings, I kept nodding, even though she couldn't see me. "Sure," I said. "Of course, that makes sense." It didn't. I could hear something clattering behind her. Maybe a dish, maybe a voice. She was already somewhere else, planning things I wasn't a part of. "All right then," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You all have a nice day." She mumbled a goodbye, and the line went quiet. I sat back in the rocking chair, the breeze pulling gently at the hem of my sleeve. A cardinal landed on the rail nearby, tilting its head like it had heard too much. I closed my eyes and let the quiet take me. They trimmed the guest list. And in doing so, they trimmed me right off the tree. The phone sat in my lap, still warm from the call. I didn't move, just sat there holding it like something fragile, something sacred. It shouldn't have felt that heavy, but it did. That little cordless thing had carried every Thanksgiving memory we used to have. Every check-in, every what should I bring, and save me a drumstick. And now, it carried the weight of the one I'd just lost. The wind brushed past my hair, light as breath. Somewhere nearby, a bird chirped once, then fell quiet again. I stared at the porch railing, my hand still holding the phone like it might ring again and change the story. It didn't. I could still smell it if I closed my eyes. Orange zest, a hint of clove, that little secret splash of vanilla I never told anyone about. I'd made that cranberry relish every year since the kids were small. Even when they brought their store-bought dishes, they asked for mine too. "Don't forget the cranberry, Mom." But this year, no one asked. I realized it right there on the porch. I could picture their menu in my mind. Green beans, mashed potatoes, maybe some boxed stuffing. But not mine. Not me. And I wasn't even angry. Just stunned. Like when you reach for a door you've opened 1,000 times, and suddenly it's locked. I looked out into the yard, the sunlight casting long stripes across the grass. The air was crisp, but I still felt the scent in my chest. Cloves, citrus, the comfort of something made by hand. And for the first time, I wondered if the recipe lived anywhere besides my memory. I didn't say a word after the call, just kept. Sitting there, nodding to no one. The lump in my throat had settled somewhere deeper, below where tears sit. Between sadness and shame, I pulled my sweater tighter, though it wasn't cold. That kind of hurt doesn't yell. It simmers. It's like stuffing left too long in the oven, dry at the edges, heavy in the middle. Still food, but no longer nourishing. I heard the sound of a rake scraping leaves down the sidewalk, a neighbor keeping busy. I almost envied that, having something to do with your hands when your heart doesn't know where to go. I looked down, at my lap. My hands were still, but inside, everything ached, and I swallowed, hard, like I was trying to push it all down with no water, no help. Just me, and Thanksgiving already slipping past me like I'd never been part of it at all. The door creaked the same way it always had, that familiar whine from the hinge near the top. The floor still gave under my heel right near the counter. Third tile in always did. I walked in slow, not for show, just because I didn't have anywhere else to be that morning. The place smelled exactly the way I remembered, like pie tins that had been through 100 holidays and eggs on a flat-top grill. The sunlight caught the edge of a chrome napkin holder and bounced a little beam right into my coffee cup. It was still warm inside, full of chatter and the clinking of plates. I didn't come for food. I wasn't hungry, not really. I came because I needed something warmer than silence. I came because this place had held my family once, and I wanted to feel just one corner of that again, and maybe, just maybe, I thought the place would still remember me. I hadn't even reached the booth when I heard it. "Miss Ada." I looked up, and there was Lucy, arms already opening wide. She smelled like cinnamon and shampoo, just like she used to. She didn't ask what I was doing there, didn't hesitate. She just hugged me like I'd been gone for 2 weeks, not 2 years. Still taking it with cream and 2 sugars? She smiled, already grabbing a mug. I nodded, blinking more than I meant to. It wasn't the coffee that warmed me. It was her remembering. That small, tender thing of being seen, like sugar folding into cream, disappearing but making everything sweeter. She came back to top off my cup, pad in one hand, pen dancing over the page. "We're gonna be slammed later," she said almost offhand. "Big Thanksgiving catering order, same family as last year. The Millers, I think?" I paused mid-stir. "Oh, no." "Wait," she said, looking up. "That's your last name, isn't it?" My breath caught, just for a second. "Yeah," I said, quietly. "It is," she blinked. "Well, how about that? Small world, huh?" I nodded and smiled, keeping it gentle. So that was the plan. That was their plan. They'd ordered Thanksgiving from here. No one told me, because I wasn't part of it. I didn't flinch, didn't drop my spoon or gasp or shake my head. "Thanks, Lucy," I said, taking a sip I didn't really want. She walked away to tend to another table, and I stayed there, alone. In that booth, my fingers circling the rim of the mug. Inside, something shifted, a soft crack, not dramatic. Just a feeling, like a plate finally giving way after being chipped too many times. I stirred slowly, the spoon scraping soft circles. Not one person noticed. The coffee steamed upward like it was trying to disappear. I let it. My smile stayed on, but it didn't mean the same thing anymore. They still loved the food. That much was clear. They just didn't want it from me. The stuffing, the pie, the cranberry relish. They wanted the comfort, but not the hands that had made it for years. I looked around the diner. It smelled like fried onions and butter and memory, and it stung more than I thought it would. I thought it had been a tradition, that the holidays were me somehow. Turns out I was just part of the packaging. My booth seat had a little tear in it now, a corner of foam peeking out. I rubbed it gently with my thumb. Something familiar, something frayed. They'd brought their holiday here, without me. I sat down where Harold used to sit. The old desk chair creaked just like it did when he'd lean back, holding a pen in one, hand and a coffee cup in the other. I didn't mean to sit there. I just found myself doing it, his photo looking back at me from the corner of the desk, smiling still, like always. I opened the file drawer, meaning to close it right away, but the papers looked too neat to ignore. Bills, ledger sheets, notes, written in his tidy handwriting. I ran my hand across the folders, feeling the edges, the quiet weight of them. The desk lamp hummed low, casting that amber light across the wood. The scent of old paper and lemon polish made something stir in my chest. I hadn't looked at our finances in a long time. Harold had handled it for years, and when he passed, I just stopped checking. But the numbers didn't lie. I wasn't. Helpless. Just overlooked. Forgotten maybe, but not powerless. After Harold passed, I didn't do much spending. I didn't need to. There was nothing I wanted that couldn't wait. So I waited. I was saved. I invested here and there, quiet choices made on quiet afternoons, and slowly, almost invisibly, it added up. I wasn't flashy. Never have been. No vacations, no big remodels, just patience and time doing what they do best, building. Tonight, sitting in his chair with my hand resting on the open ledger, I saw it clearly for the first time. The ink didn't scream wealth, but it spoke in a calm, steady voice. A whisper of security I didn't know I'd grown. I had more than I needed. But no one needs me. That was the part that stung. The numbers were solid. The silence around them wasn't. The envelope sat unopened for 2 days before I dared slide it out. Offer inquiry was stamped in neat type across the front. The diner's name is just below it. I ran my thumb over the seal. I didn't open it right away. I looked at Harold's, pen resting on the desk, the same one he used to write checks and sign birthday cards. That place. It had once held our laughter, our meals, the smell of bacon and the sound of silverware dancing. It wasn't just a building, it was a chapter, one I never got to finish. Maybe I couldn't write the beginning again, but maybe, just maybe, I could choose the ending. I picked up the phone without flinching. It nestled between my shoulder and ear like it used to when I called in lunch orders or RSVP'd to school plays. A man answered. "This is Sam at Holloway Properties." I cleared my throat. "Yes, I'd like to talk about the diner on Main Street. The listing says it's available." "Ah, that one. Yes, it is," he said. "Would you like to come in and—" "No," I interrupted gently. "Just tell me the numbers." He did. Square footage, purchase cost, transfer terms. I nodded, scribbling everything down. The shadows stretched long across the carpet. Harold's photo watched from beside my hand. That call didn't feel like power. It felt like remembering I belonged somewhere, that I still had choices, still had space to claim. The contract arrived the next day, digital and cold, but I read every word, not out of revenge, not even out of pride. I bought the diner because something in me needed to feel real again. Not remembered, not respected. Seen. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I didn't want to make a statement. I just needed to leave a fingerprint somewhere that used to hold my voice. Grief doesn't always wear black. Sometimes it wears soft sweaters and signs purchase agreements. The clock ticked behind me. My tea had gone cold on the coaster, untouched. I moved the mouse, clicked sign, and just like that, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt present. The folder sat neatly on the desk, right where I'd left it the night before. The papers inside were smooth, clean, official. It could have been anything. A contract, a bank form, some harmless thing, but it wasn't. I pulled my sweater tighter around my shoulders. The window beside me was fogged up from the cold, my breath curling faint against the glass. Outside, the sky was pale and brittle, like it could crack if you touched it. I didn't rush. I read every line again, even though I already knew them. Not because I was unsure, because I needed to feel it, every word, every clause. This wasn't about buying a building. This was about voice. Mine. My coffee sat beside the folder, still warm, steam rising steady in the quiet. I picked up the pen and held it for a long moment. The silence in the room pressed in, not loud, but full, like it was holding its breath with me. Then I signed, slow and steady, and as the ink sank into the paper, so did the truth. I wasn't just overlooked. I was here. The man smiled as he handed me the keys. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said. They felt heavier than I expected, cold, ordinary, just metal. But in my palm, they carried something bigger, something sacred. I curled my fingers, around them slowly, feeling the ridges and weight settle into my skin. Outside, the morning was sharp. Frost nipped at my nose. My breath came out white and steady. The sun was starting to rise, casting a golden line across the sidewalk and over the front of the diner. I stood there for a moment, staring at the place that had once held birthdays. Pie slices, Herald's Sunday newspaper folded just so, booths where we laughed until the coffee went cold. He would have smiled seeing me like this, standing straight, key in hand. I wasn't claiming power, I was reclaiming memory. The diner was quiet when I stepped inside. Chairs stacked, counters wiped down. That familiar scent of lemon polish mixed with coffee that had been brewed too long ago. I stood in the center of the room, my hand brushing lightly against the back of a booth. This wasn't revenge. Not really. I didn't buy the place to prove a point. It was more like a whisper, where I used to shout, plead, hope. I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted them to pause, to stop and wonder where the warmth went. To feel, if only for a moment, the shape of me where I used to be. Not out of anger, just out of a longing to be noticed before it was too late. The marker scratched softly against the cardstock, each letter slow, measured. CLOSEDI took my time, made the letters neat, almost careful. For a private remembrance. I stood back and read it again, holding the sign steady between my hands. It didn't say anything cruel, nothing loud, but the truth was all there, tucked between the words like a pressed flower. I stepped outside, the air colder now. My fingers trembled slightly as I taped the sign to the front window. It held. The street was still. A few dry leaves skittered across the sidewalk. Inside, the hum of the old refrigerator was the only sound, steady, unbothered, like it had been waiting with me. It wasn't about the turkey, it was about the ache, about naming something they'd ignored for so long. Not to hurt them, but to honor what I used to be in their lives, and what I still was, even if they had forgotten. I imagined them pulling into the parking lot like they always did, casseroles in hand, laughter still caught in their coats, and then, pausing, frowning, reading the sign, I imagined the confusion first, then the quiet, maybe a long silence as someone said, "Did you know about this?" And then, the echo, the empty space where a table used to wait, where comfort used to live. I didn't wish pain on them. That was never it. I just wanted them to feel what I'd been carrying all this time. This hollowness, this space I used to fill. Let them taste it, not as punishment, but as understanding. Sometimes you have to take the seat away so they remember who used to sit in it. The first car pulled in slowly, tires slipping through a puddle that sent tiny ripples across the lot. Then another. I stood behind the counter, watching through the diner's fogged-up window as doors opened and familiar shapes emerged. My daughter's red coat, my grandson's too-big hoodie, casserole dishes wrapped in foil, plastic pie containers from the grocery store. Their steps were quick, light. Laughter floated faintly from across the lot. Carefree, unaware, they didn't know yet. They had no idea what was waiting behind the glass, or rather, what wasn't. Their tradition had led them here, just like last year. But this time, something had changed. and as each car parked one by one, I felt something still and quiet settle in my chest. Not anger, not joy, just knowing they'd feel it soon. I saw their faces before they made it to the door, confused, then unsure, then tight around the mouth. Their eyes moved from the sign to each other. Closed, my daughter mouthed. They leaned in, squinting at the neat handwriting. Closed for a private remembrance. My daughter tilted her head slightly, like she wasn't sure she'd read it right. Someone else pointed, murmured something I couldn't hear through the glass. The casseroles stayed clutched in their arms. Still warm, I imagined, but not as warm as the place they expected to walk into. They brought food. No apologies. They came for comfort. What they found was the outline of absence pressed gently across the glass, and I was already inside. Her eyes found mine through the window. It wasn't dramatic, just one quiet second of recognition, like a light flicking on in a room you forgot was dark. She didn't smile. I didn't either. She didn't wave, and neither did I. We just looked at each other. Rain dotted the glass between us, tiny beads clinging to the pane. My reflection blurred over hers for a second, like the past and present trying to touch. She blinked once, like she was about to speak, even though the window would have muffled every word. But no words came, just that pause, that too-late breath. Didn't move. I wanted her to see me, not as the woman they forgot, but as the one who still remembered everything. The kettle whistled softly as I reached for it. My hands didn't shake. I dropped the tea bag into the mug, watching it bloom slowly in the swirl of hot water. Just like always. No need to rush. No need to hide. I could hear footsteps outside, the soft scuff of shoes stopping short at the door. I could have turned away, maybe tucked behind the counter and waited for it all to pass. But I didn't. I poured the water gently, the porcelain clinking faintly as I set the mug down. This wasn't about making a scene. It was about being still. Sometimes, quiet is the only kind of strength you need. I stayed behind the counter, the steam rising from my cup. I didn't open the door. I could have. I could have said something smooth or soft or forgiving. But I didn't. I let the window stay between us. Thin as it was, it held years. They stood in the drizzle, eyes searching the inside like maybe someone else would come and explain it. I brought the spoon to the edge of the cup and tapped it lightly. That sound, just that, echoed in the space between us. Let them sit in silence. Sometimes silence teaches what words never could. They came with foil-covered trays and pies in plastic clamshells. The kind of food that fills a plate, but not a heart. They came expecting welcome, expecting tradition, maybe even control. But that's not what they found. They brought food like it was enough, like it could smooth over what was missing. But what I needed couldn't be reheated, couldn't be sliced. Their voices muffled through the glass, trying to make sense of a moment they never imagined would come. And inside, the scent of tea and lemon polish curled around me like memory. This time, I had chosen the distance, and they hadn't come prepared for that. The knock came soft, barely louder than the hum of the old fridge in the back. Not a knock that demanded entry, more like a question, a maybe. I looked up from my tea, and there she was, framed in fogged glass, hand still resting against the door. She looked smaller somehow, not in size, but in certainty. The kind of shrinking. That happens when you realize you might have missed something too big to fix with flowers or phone calls. She was shivering. I could tell, even through the glass, but not from the cold. This was something deeper, heavier. Like the chill that comes when you realize something warm has gone out, and you might be the reason. The light was dull now, late afternoon shadows stretching along the floor of the diner. I hadn't unlocked the door. I didn't move. I just met her eyes. She waited, and in that waiting, I saw the weight of every unopened message and unspoken thought between us. She didn't open with excuses. No fake smiles, no fast words, just one. Why? Her voice cracked when she said it. Not loud, not sharp, just real, just quiet and breaking. I stood slowly, the old wood creaking beneath my feet, and I looked at her, not as my grown daughter with her polished life and curated distance, but as the little girl who used to reach for my apron strings when she was scared. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make space for truth. You really don't know? I asked, not accusing, just tired. Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. That one word, why, carried more weight than every Thanksgiving table we never shared. And in that moment, the years between us didn't feel like time. They felt like walls, and she was finally knocking. I'm not angry, I said gently, sitting back down. She stood in the doorway, hands still clenched, like she wasn't sure if she should stay. But I remember. I looked down at my tea. I remember the birthdays, the ones that passed with nothing but silence. I remember making the cranberry relish even when no one asked for it. I remember the calls I left voicemails on. You never called back, her head dropped slightly. I'm not listing things to make you feel bad. I'm telling you what I carry, because you never asked. I kept my voice steady. I never wanted a parade. I just wanted to matter. She stepped in slowly, her feet barely making a sound on the tile. Her shadow stretched beside me like it was reaching too. I didn't know, she whispered. I know, I said, but I did. I saved every card, I said, smiling a little. Even the ones you scribbled on when you were 7. I keep them in a wooden box under the bed. She looked surprised. And the first pie I made in that old kitchen, Harold dropped it on the floor. We ate it anyway. A soft laugh escaped me, and for a second, her face relaxed. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I looked around the diner, fingers wrapped around my cooling tea. I just wanted you to know who I was when you weren't looking. I told her about Harold humming while he carved the turkey, how he used to tap his foot without realizing it. I told her how I still picture her and her brother at the booth by the window, fighting over the last bite of peach cobbler. I don't think you stopped loving me, I said. I think you stopped remembering. She didn't say a word, but she sat down and listened. I didn't lock the doors to punish you, I said. I did it because I needed you to feel what it's like, to be erased, just for a day. She nodded slowly, eyes red. It wasn't about spite. It was about space. About me taking up just enough to be seen. The lights outside blinked on, one by one. Their glow filtered through the window in quiet lines across the floor. You still matter, she whispered. I know, I said, but I needed you to know too. I took a breath, the windows fogging just a bit from the warmth inside. You came back, I said, softer now. That means something. She reached forward slowly, setting her hand flat on the table between us, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an empty chair. I felt like the table. She didn't say a word. Not aloud, but her eyes did. She looked at me like she was seeing me again, not as someone who made too much noise, asked too many questions, showed up with pie and memories, but as someone she once loved, still loved. Tears filled her lashes, but they didn't fall. I didn't need them to. I reached across the table. My hand met hers, gently. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to begin again. She squeezed softly. I let her. Outside, the rain tapped like a metronome on the windows. Inside, the lights were warm, and the space between us wasn't empty anymore. We sat, 2 chairs pulled close again after too long apart, and somehow that was enough to start. I set the table slower this year. Fewer forks to count, fewer napkins to fold just right. 4 chairs. That was all. One pie sat cooling by the window, and in the center, a little glass vase with a few leftover mums, some petals curling at the edges but still holding on. The lace curtains filtered the morning light, casting soft patterns onto the tablecloth. The turkey had just begun to perfume the air with sage and butter. There was no rush, no buzzing doorbell or clatter of extra chairs. Each plate I placed came with care, but no expectations. Not this year. There was something comforting in the stillness. I'm not waiting for someone who might not show up. I no longer needed a crowd to feel full. I just needed whoever chose to stay. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. She walked in with the wind still clinging to her coat. Cheeks flushed from the cold, arms wrapped around a basket covered in a dish towel. "Made biscuits," she said, a little out of breath. I blinked. "From scratch?" She nodded, smiling shyly. "They're not perfect." I took the basket gently. They were still warm, slightly uneven in shape, and the scent of butter rose softly into the room. I didn't say much, just pressed her hand and said, "They're perfect." She shrugged off her coat and headed to the kitchen like she'd never left. And I stood there holding her biscuits, knowing they were more than just bread. They were her way of saying, "I'm here now." And I heard it. I truly did. He'd barely sat down before asking for seconds. "More stuffing?" he said, already holding out his plate. I laughed. "Did you even chew the first helping?" He grinned, scooping up more, then leaned over when dessert was served. "Can I have more pie too?" "Of course," I said, sliding the plate over. His voice had deepened since I saw him last, and he sat taller now, but his grin was the same. He didn't eat fast, just full, like the food meant something, like he trusted it to hold him. The jazz on the radio played soft in the background, the clink of silverware and soft steam filling the room with a kind of music only families know. His laughter wasn't loud this year, but it was rooted, and so was he. No one mentioned last year, not the sign in the window, not the closed doors or the cold dinners, but it sat with us, like a photograph tucked behind the fridge. You don't have to see it to know it's there. Conversation. Danced lightly between safe topics, recipes, school stories, weather. But every glance, every pause, felt just a little longer, just a little heavier with what wasn't being said. And still, it felt okay. Our eyes did the speaking. Little nods. Soft smiles. A hand resting briefly on a wrist. It was all enough. Forgiveness doesn't always need a ceremony. Sometimes it just needs a room warm with food and people willing to stay. As we passed the mashed potatoes, I felt it. Not awkwardness, just a kind of awareness. They didn't just grab dishes this year. They offered, waited. Their eyes met. Mine longer than usual. It wasn't about guilt or performance. It felt quieter than that. Realer. The clink of dishes softened. The air smelled of cinnamon and turkey. Outside, the sun began its slow slide down behind the trees, casting a soft golden light through the windows. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't in a while. Seen. Not because I cooked. Not because I hosted. Just because I was there. And they wanted me there. The dishes were cleared. The candles had burned low. One last slice of pie sat untouched. I pulled off my apron and hung it gently by the pantry. For the first time in years, I didn't sit as the cook or the coordinator. I sat as someone welcome. I eased into my chair and pulled the sweater tighter around me. Its sleeves were worn, the cuffs a little frayed, but it held warmth. So did this moment. I looked around the table. No grand declarations, no teary speeches. Just presence. Just plates and laughter and quiet nods. I didn't need perfection. I needed this. Love, I've learned, doesn't always remember every detail. It forgets dates and recipes, But it stays. And this year, so did they. Sometimes, the table doesn't. Need to be full, just honest. If this reminded you of a time love showed up quietly, I'd be grateful if you shared it below. And if you'd like to stay close for more stories like mine, you're always welcome here.